And last year, I made I made a review of those Titanic related true story books, which that which I done for this. First, I did Sister of the Fortune Family, in which the author is Anna Lee Huber, and the second Mrs. Astor by Shauna Abe, who is the author as well. Knowing that I made two-part video, which I skipped the backstory of it. So anyway, you could get those books online of Amazon.com, even Barnes and Noble as well, and all in any bookstores if you search for it. Let's get down to business with the book I'm gonna be talking about. The novel is Sheltering Angel, which is based on a true story of Titanic, and the author is Laura Bryant. It may be a good book for this, but it is that. Well, a story about the crew of Titanic as well as passengers. Be saying the least for that. No times past for this. My apologies for this. But apparently, this is the true story, which am I for that? Before I get down to business, I should know that Titanic Week has already been gone, passed by and forgotten until next year. So, starting in April of next year, I'm going to review books of Titanic related, not something else to be down, dangling on with. So, anyway, you know the rest of it. Which I'm going to tell everything of this book, as well looking up from this Encyclopedia Titanica, which I thanks to. So either way, let's get down to business. From a working class family, Scotsman Andrew Carrigan stewards for wealthy travelers aboard elegant cruise ships of the 20th century, but he resents those who flaunt their wealth. Apparently there was a person on knowledge and name of. I'm gonna read down a description later on of him, Andrew or Carrigan, who hasn't knowing that it is true, knowing that he's a non-fictional character. Since I look it up for him of the encyclopedia Titanica.org, you want to check on the site. He was born on July 3rd, 1873 in Scots Lanarkshire, Scotland, which is a small town midway between Glasgow and Edinburgh. He was the son of David Carrigan, a joiner, and his wife Janine Thompson. His father was a glassman by birth, and his mother was born in Largo 5th, and they were married in Edinburgh on October 11, 1872. He has two no siblings. Elizabeth, and Jesse. He first appears on the 1881 census, living in St. Andrews, Edinburgh, but there is no sign of he or his family on the 1891 and 1901 census report. Listed as a sea steward, he was married in St. Luke's Church, Camden, London on August 21st, 1901 to dressmaker Emily Susan Jane Jones, daughter of William Edward Jones, and wholesale picker and Emily Nee Baker. Both their address was stated as 30 Glenmore Street in St. Prussia, Emily's parents' home. The couple will have two children, Cindy, Andrew, and Gloria. Andrew was absent from the 1911 census, most likely at sea, but his wife and children were shown living 60 Charlton Road in Southampton. He signed up on the Titanic on April 4th, 1912. Cunningham gave his address at 60 Charlton Road, Southampton. His previous ship has been oceanic, and as a veteran steward, he received monthly wages of £3.50. He was stationed on sea deck, off charge with 9 staterooms, and the passengers he served include John by Cummins and his wife Florence, Walter and Virginia Clark, W.T. Stead, Eve and Margaret Graham, and Mrs. Graham, Governess Elizabeth Shoes. On Sunday, April 14, Cunningham had enjoyed an afternoon break from his duties. That evening, he had just begun his watch and was stationed at the forward end of D deck, first class accommodation, to answer bells. That is, that is to answer calls from passengers. He had returned to Stewart's Glory Hole on E deck and was lying on his bunk when the ship struck and another stateroom steward advised him to get up. He returned to D deck where he answered a few calls, instructing a handful of ladies on how to put on their life belts. He descended he descended to E deck to check on passengers there, and with I'm sorry. In that phase, he took the opportunity to look into the stairwell leading from that deck down to the post office. He noted that water had already engulfed that area. He noted that water had already engulfed that area. During his reconnaissance of the post office, he left to answer another call, and during that during that time, stewards had gathered to their respective station. Cunningham returned to his own station on C deck around 12:30 a.m. Most of his charges already had been raided, raided and left their cabins, and with only 3 left by that point. Still having received no official orders at the time, a word of mom instructions, Cunningham raided in that area. During that time, he encountered 3 of his charges. John Barry Cummins, who had returned to the stateroom for an overcoat. Walter Mel Clark, who came to the stateroom for a light belt, and William Stead, the latter German, asking Cunningham how to fasten his light belt. Cunningham helped the elderly set into his life belt and then went about his business. Sorry, sorry that the camera is getting closer for this. I know that I cannot even take of the story too much for this, so I hope you guys can read it for that. Well, his biological physics, his biology for this. Then you could search for the passengers, the crew, even the officers of Titanic. You check on Encyclopedia Titanica.org to find out about those passengers, crew, as well as officers, which I'm repeating again, which God not gonna do this again for that. Apparently, Cunningham had boarded on lifeboat 4 with all the women and children first. And when that's lifeboat 4 has been lowered down for this. So around 2:20, like Titanic has sunk, and all the survivors has waited patiently for about about an hour or so until the Carpathia arrived, bringing all the survivors of Titanic into the ship. Well, the rest may be history for that. Well, the actors. Cunningham resumed his career at sea and sailed the dangerous waters of World War One. During peacetime, he worked mainly for Cunard and spent most of the 1920s working as a bedroom steward aboard the Britannia, with a brief spell aboard the Aquarius. In 1922, he was still listed on the yeah, by Abe, which I couldn't announce the name, Britannia, by April 1930, and was described as standing at 5 foot 1 and weighing 190 pounds. Andrew and his family later live at 35 Upper Brown Hill in nursing, Hampshire, where he remained for the rest of his life. He passed away age 58 in the Royal South Hampshire Hospital on September 1st, 1932, and was buried in Hollybrook Cemetery, Southampton. His widow Emily remained at 35 Upper Brown Hill Road for a number of years before she moved to Darling Gardens in Southampton, where she died April 28, 1962, at the age of 88. His son Cindy later worked as a brewery representative and was married in 1930 to Constance Alice Jamon. Sorry, I can't pronounce the name. They later moved to Conway, Wales for a number of years, had no children, and returned to Southampton where they eventually divorced, with both remarrying. Sidney's second wife was Molly Robertson, whom he married in 1957. Sidney remained in Southampton, where he died on August 26, 1984. Andrew's daughter Gloria married in 1934 to Charles Joseph Calhoun, a shipping flight clerk, and they live in Southampton, remaining childless. Will in 1972, Gloria died in Southampton on July 15, 1992. Well, here's a note that you might be know of this, as of the images for that. Well, know of Andrew Cunningham biography. Now let's get on to the New Yorkers, Florence and Barry Cummins. Let's get New Yorkers, Florence and Barry Cummins. First class passenger, traveling aboard Titanic are exception, and the three discover an ancestral connection. Let's get on to biography later on for this. I continue on with the description. As the ship sank on the fateful morning of April 15, 1912, Florence watches in horror from her lifeboat. In the darkness of night, she searches the water for her husband and recognizes a man swimming through the frigid water towards her is Andrew. Well, description for this. But I'm not going to give you spoilers and details for that one. So speaking of this, let's get on to Forrest Cummings. Nate Briggs was born was oh, Richard Richard Thayer. My apology. Which is Nate Thayer in Boston. She was born in Boston, Massachusetts on December 31st, 1873. She was the youngest daughter of George Thayer, Keeper, and Ella Sexton Briggs, both Bostonians who had married on February 9th, 1871. One or two children to her parents. Florence' only sibling was her elder sister, Elena, who was born in 1872 on March 3rd. Florence and her family first appeared on the 1880 census when they were residing at an address in Boston owned by her maternal grandparents Harrison and Elizabeth Thayer. She was married in Brookline, Massachusetts on September 24th, 1896 to fellow Bostonian John Bradley Cummings, a banker and stockbroker, later partner in Cummings and Markwell located at Wall Street. The couple initially lived in Brookline, Massachusetts, and have their first two children there, John Bradley Jr. and Wells Bradley. They moved to Manhattan around 1900, appearing there on the year census, and they will have another son with in that city, Thayer. The family appeared on the 1910 census, still living in Manhattan at 50 East 64th Street, and with four female servants, all Irish. In the spring of 1912, Mrs. Cummings and her husband embarked for a 6-week European vacation, and for the return to the U.S., boarded Titanic at Cherbourg, France, as first-class passengers. With, with their board, they occupy cabin C-85. Following the collision with the iceberg, Mr. and Mrs. Cummings went to the boat deck and was among the group of first-class passengers heard down to A deck to enter Lifeboat 4. Mrs. Cummings stayed with the other ladies around Lifeboat 4 and waited until the boat was finally lowered. She refused to leave her husband, but assured her that he would follow and lay a boat. I'm going to tell you about Mr. Cummings' failed, failed tragedy, uh, failed tragedy later on. Later on, Florence returned to New York, home 50 East 64th Street, where she was prostrated with grief and confined to bed. She remained hopeful that her husband and somehow survived, perhaps picked up by a schooner she claimed to have seen in the I can't pronounce it, of the Titanic wreck site. In late May 1912, and was still in the morning wearing suitable dark attire. Mrs. Cummings attended a dinner hosted by Miss Madeline Astor at her New York home to honor Carpathia's Captain Arthur Ralston. And Sergeant Frank McGee, also in attendance, was Mrs. John Boylan Thayer. Where were? Florence was a servant not lost when her middle son Wells later entered the Marines during World War I and died on June 30th, 1918 from wounds sustained earlier during a battle of Bellewood, France. He was just 18 years old. In 1921, Mrs. Cummings remarried to the divorce and attorney Chester Armstrong, a native Iowa who was employed by the Standard Oil Company as general counsel. The couple lived for several years in Bedford Hills, New York, and will continue to travel extensively. She accompanied her husband on business trips abroad, and they appeared on numerous passengers lists in the 1920s and 1930s, including those of Euphoria, Majestic, and Voyage Abroad, the Olympic in 1928. Places they visited include Britain, Switzerland, Italy, Belgium, and France. The year 1937 was to be Crew 1 performance. In March of that year, she lost her eldest son, John Bradley Jr., when he died from a stroke, only 39 years old. Later on April 19, later on April 21st, that's the video. She became a widow for a second time when Chester's son died. Florence appeared on the 1940 census, living at 1220 Park Avenue with her three servants. She spent her last days living at 775 Park Avenue and passed away on September 2nd, 1945. She was buried in Mount Auburn Cemetery, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Her first husband is commemorated on her monument. Scarce to the memory of John Bradley Cummins, born September 26, 1872, lost at sea on SS Titanic, April 15, 1912. Greater love, hate hath no man than his. Great, I got heavy again. Sorry. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Well, there's a note for that. Reference, source, newspaper articles. Oh, yeah. Right, for John Barry Cummings. Well, I found him for this. He was born on September 26, 1872, in Boston, Massachusetts. He was the son of John Wells Cummings, a Southern Porter, and Abby M. Clark. He was the youngest of three children. Cummings' other siblings were Clara Louise, Mrs. George H. Winbell, and Marion Wells, later Miss Frank B. Burns. John later worked as a banker and was married to Brookline, Massachusetts on September 24, 1896 to Forrest Briggs Slayer. The couple initially lived in Brookline, Massachusetts and had first two children, John Barry Jr. and Wells Riley, which I mentioned for this. They moved to Manhattan of New York City, New York in 1990. Known as census, which they appear on the census, and they have another son. Listen, and I see there. John was a stockbroker. He was a partner in Cummins and Markwood, located at Wall Street. Was also a director in Surface Torpedo Boat Company. Outside of work, he was a member of Ragged Metropolitan Riding and Canoe Country Clubs. His life was insured for $10,000. In spring of 1912, his Cummings and his wife Florence embarked on a 6 week long European vacation for their return to U.S. boarded Titanic at Sherbrooke, France as first class passengers. Ticket number 17599, which is cost £71. Nice day. It is aboard the occupied cabin CA5. The flying collision with the iceberg, Mr. and Mrs. Cummings went to boat deck and were among the group of first class passengers hurled down to A deck to enter Lifeboat 4. Mrs. Cummings stayed with the other women around Lifeboat 4, waiting until the boat was finally lowered. She refused to leave her husband, but he assured her that he would fall in a later boat. John Barry Collins died in the sinking, and his body, if recovered, was never identified. And he was cremated on his real grave in Mount Auburn Cemetery, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Which I mentioned tell you for that. His widow Florence later remarried before her death in 1949. But I'm not going to mention the age for this. I didn't know the details for that. I didn't know the details for this. Well, you know the faith of his sons. Well, you know the faith of his sons. I'm going to show it to you. And everything that you should know of. You know, it's a true story. I should know it's a true story, which everybody still fascinate of Titanic and everything beneath it. So so you know everything for this.